Alright, what's going on, family? It's your boy 804 here. Last video I mentioned that we are trying to grind to Mythic this season. Well, I'm very, very proud to announce that we did make it a few days ago, piloting Gruul Fires. I'll have probably another video coming out in the next couple of days here to talk about my thoughts on the format, on the thoughts on that deck in general, how it's positioned. And yeah, so it's been a great couple of days. We are currently doing the workshop here with yard work versus zero to hero. I did look at both decks. I'm a huge Golgari guy, so I went with this one first. I think this is a keepable hand, and I actually think I'm going to let go of a forest here. So yeah, that was the goal. That's been my goal as a Magic player for a really long time. So it feels really, really good to have finally made it to Mythic. And the next goal, I think, is to try to get to the top 1,500 or 1,000 or whatever it might be, and hopefully. Sorry, give me 1 second here. And hopefully get an invitation to the qualifier. That would be, I think, the dream. So we'll see. So I'm thinking what I might do here is offer up a trade. Good chance he just doesn't take it, but if he does, we are more than willing to go for it. And I think we're just going to try to Heartless Act in case he really tries to go all in on this Legionnaire. Which he is. So we'll just go ahead and kill that now. Becomes significantly harder to kill it after he gets a few spells on it. Counters, excuse me. Heartless Act kills creatures without counters, so we needed to do that there. I don't actually remember if we needed double black or double green for anything, but just in case, we'll grab the green source here. We'll save the Mire Triton. Not only do we want to hit land drops, but we want to kind of hide the fact that we do have the Death Toucher here. So, given the fact that we don't really want to trade Skull Prophet for either of these, I'm comfortable going with Spawn. And then what we'll probably end up doing is milling ourselves rather than playing the Triton. Got another hero, so he's going to be building a very wide board here. See if he decides to get in. It's not, so we will be milling ourselves. This also feeds Lotleth Giant. And I absolutely love Skull Prophet. I think he's so neat. I'm a huge sucker for Golgari cards in general. It is my favorite 2-color combination. Sultai is my favorite 3-color combination. So anytime we get mana dorks that also do Golgari things, I am 100% about it. Doesn't look like we really have anything that we want to sacrifice. Reanimate just yet. So I think with that being said, we can just Mire Triton. It's a little bit scary here. Obviously, we don't want the Boros player to. Well, it's a huge board, and unfortunately, we are kind of chock full of 1 toughness creatures. But that's okay. Hopefully, we can. Given the fact that the I forget what the. I guess it's not an evergreen term anymore. Is it Constellation? No, that's not right. Heroic, excuse me. Given the fact that, do we want to get in with Spawn? Doesn't seem like it. Given the fact that the heroic triggers don't actually add toughness, our one toughness creatures can probably still trade pretty fairly into what he's doing. That being said, things are certainly getting scary here. And we are still going to continue to mill ourselves. We'll see if he decides to... Wow, that's pretty savage. Okay. So we did get another spawn, which is pretty good. Alright. So I'm wondering if we should Blood for Bones our... Could be Blood for Bones our Mire Triton to get back another spawn and return Molder Hulk to our hand. I guess we wouldn't really be able to play it this turn, but we're not really doing anything else. So I think it's okay. Could also just be return Molder Hulk to the battlefield, actually. And we can probably... I think I actually like the Skull Prophet here. And we'll go with this. This allows us to double spell, so... And obviously we do want to eventually get to a place where Lilith Giant can kind of one-shot them. I do think that Boros deck has Conclave Tribunal, which is pretty strong against Molder Hulk, unfortunately. I don't think this deck runs, other than Blood for Bones, a whole lot of sacrifice outlets, at least not in instant speed. So that could get a little bit difficult to deal with. Pyro Helix is really good, actually, against us, with all the 1 toughness creatures we're having. Tactician. So I imagine we're going to take a pretty fat hit here. He probably has some sort of... Sure. I still think we were supposed to offer the trade there. We kind of want to get this, as many of those combat tricks out of his hand as possible. Alright, so we're taking a huge chunk here. That hurt. Let me just turn the game sounds a little bit lower here. So, 3 other cards. We do have 14, a lot of which are lands. So we'll go on ahead and... I don't want to give up all of the lands necessarily. I don't think we have a way to get Relentless Pursuit back, so we can just go on ahead and get rid of those. The reason why I don't want to exile the lands here is because we might get some additional value with Molder Hulk at some point later on. We definitely don't want to get rid of creatures for the Lilith Giant. I think we're going to get in. It's possible we were maybe supposed to just get in with the spawn there, but I kind of need to put the opponent under some level of pressure as well. And what I'm kind of hoping is we can just survive here until... Okay. So I guess it wouldn't have mattered which creature we swung with here, given the fact that he gets protection. And I think that is just the game. Sure. The game. Probably just didn't do enough there to try and control the board. But we're going to keep jamming these decks in here until we get the workshop done. It's a little bit unfortunate. I do think that, you know, the longer the game goes, to a certain extent, the Boros deck is a little bit favored given the fact that they get protection, so we can't even block. But it's a little bit of a risky hand if we don't hit our land drops. We'll keep. We get, so we do hit a land, which is nice, but we do get pretty blown out by Chandra's Pyrohelix here with our double Mire Triton start. Hopefully he doesn't have the Legionnaire here on the play. It's okay. So we definitely get blown out by God's Willing here, because we are 100% going to block. I don't see a way that we cannot. He could also just get... I hope he plays the Pyrohelix now. That's fine. Much rather he do that now than after playing like another Triton or something. And he had the God's Willing either way. Topped it, so it's possible that's another protection spell. So Gorging Vulture is definitely more mana efficient, but it doesn't trade with the 10th District Legionnaire. So I think we'll go with this. If he's got another protection spell, he's got it. So another Legionnaire. Doesn't swing. So that kind of leads me to believe he might not actually have the protection spell, which is good for us. A little bit, I wouldn't call it punished here by drawing a 2-drop, but it's a little unfortunate for sure. Do we like Gorging Vulture? If we play Skull Prophet, we'll have access to 6 mana next turn. It still doesn't allow us to double spell. If we go Vulture, we'll still have access to 5 mana. Also doesn't allow us to double spell, but it is possible that maybe we get something a little bit stronger to reanimate with, something like Blood for Bones. And this kind of hedges a little bit against Pyrohelix if he has another one. Giant's not a bad one. I do love Necrotic Wound. I think it's a really, really fun removal spell for a deck that leverages the graveyard. So he did have the Pyrohelix. So opponent is off to a very strong start. He is down to 1 card, so... And opts not to swing in with a 3/3. I think that's an interesting choice. We will be playing all of our lands here. Honestly, I don't mind the Giant, just as something to block. I think we'll do that. We'll throw the Mire Triton back in our hand here. So the Giant, this allows us to, if he doesn't have targeted spells, which seems like he does here. So I imagine it's going to get protection. But if he targets the hero here, he won't. If he targets the hero, he pumps both of his other creatures. If he's got God's Willing, it's going to be really difficult for me to deal with that. Especially if he God's Willings like the 10th District Legionnaire, because it's just going to get bigger than what I can deal with. I think I'm supposed to block. It might have been block the weaker 10th District Legionnaire, but that means he'd have to target that one instead of the stronger one. Which might honestly, given the fact that we're playing Heartless Act, be smarter anyways. But decides not to do either, so maybe he's got like a hero. No hero play. Alright, well we'll go with the Mire Triton here. If he's got another Pyrohelix, I think we've already seen 2. I don't actually remember how many of those the deck runs. We certainly get blown out by another one, but, you know, ultimately, sure. So that's the 3rd one. Sucks, but now Molder Hulk is just going to be huge, so it's really not the end of the world. We're gonna go with the weaker one here. If he wants to give it protection, Rimrock Knight. Wow. Okay. It's pretty brutal. I guess it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but I don't really want him to know that we have another one of those, so we'll go with this. So I'm pretty sure we can escape the Chain Whip Arachnir anyways. So I'm going to grab the Evolving Wilds here just for the fact that I can... double spell this turn. And the Evolving Wilds will actually allow me to thin out my deck just a little bit here. Not probably huge relevance, but still worth doing, I think. It also allows me to net a card in my graveyard that way. Alright, so he's got a hero here. Opponent is Hellbent, so we know that that is the game. Awesome. So I ran out of gas there. We ran through 3 Pyrohelixes that were all fairly relevant. Getting blown out by that multiple times is pretty difficult, but pretty fun deck overall, I would say. Top end of the curve here was Conclave, which we didn't see in either of the games. We did see Tactician, Heroes of the Revel. So yeah, I think that was a pretty good showing from both decks. In the first game, the Boros deck did manage to just run us over with protection spells to get their creatures through. Fairy Godmother was also pretty neat. One thing with these workshops, I'll sometimes find that the decks are a little bit lopsided in the sense that one deck just has an incredible matchup against the other one. I think the most recent example, there was an Angels deck against the Dimir Self-Mill deck, something along those lines, and it was just almost a non-matchup. It was just a free win for one of the decks. This one I think is certainly more evenly matched, so it was a lot of fun. But yeah, I will probably doing some more videos here going forward, focused on ranked in Mythic, which is new to me. I played it about 4 or 5 games yesterday, just spamming Gruul Fires because that's what got me into Mythic, and didn't do so hot. I think I won 1 game out of 4. I might have to rethink some things, but certainly really happy to get to Mythic. I guess while I have you guys, if you want to stay and check it out, I'll show you the deck that I used to get to Mythic. Just kind of want to gush over it for a little bit because it is really neat. So this is Gruul Fires, and I've made a couple adjustments to the deck that I had initially, I just kind of net decked it from, I think it was Goldfish at the time. So, a couple of things. One, I did this in best of 1. So, that's important because I cut the land count a little bit. We're running 26 lands in this deck, and normally our Boreal Grazer decks, and for the most part, the decks that I see that run this type of build, they're at 27, 28 lands. I think actually a lot of them are at 28 lands. Well, in best of 1, from what I understand, you get an algorithm that kind of allows you to draw a few more lands in your beginning hand. I think what it is they choose between 2 separate hands and give you the one that has more lands. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong about that, but basically for a best of 1 format, I felt like 26 lands was enough. I was, I try not to fall too far deep into results-based thinking, but it really did seem like I was just flooding out way too much. And given the fact that we're in Gruul, we do have some tools to filter our hands, but not a lot. So I felt like 26 lands was correct. I feel like I don't mana screw as nearly as often as I was mana flooding. It still happens. It's still magic, but this kind of helped, I think, with the variance. So for replacing those 2 lands, I actually added in a Fire Prophecy and a Bond Flourishing. I don't know if this is correct, but here was my thought process. With the fact that at the time, Yori and Luca, the Jeskai and 4-color builds, they were like 20% of the meta, and it felt like that's all I was playing against. It was a very strong deck. So the reason why I actually added in a Fire Prophecy is because in response to the metagame shifting towards Luca, you saw a huge upsurgence in mono red and other aggressive decks. Fire Prophecy is a way to kind of clear out some of those early threats. It kind of felt like if we really weren't doing much until turn 3 or 4, with Kahira often just getting shocked, Bone Crusher Giants away, we needed an extra way to get rid of really pesky threats in the early game. Um, One of the most difficult things to deal with for this deck is the cycling deck, and if we don't have a way of killing Flourishing Fox on turn 2, we just lose to it, because they can play Flourishing Fox on turn 1, and on turn 2 they immediately can make it a 3/3. That's kind of our last opportunity to get rid of it. So I wanted an extra Fire Prophecy for Flourishing Fox. In some cases, I was seeing some mono red that wasn't an Obosh based deck. It was kind of your traditional Runaway Steamkin and Berkeley versions, which I actually think are just as strong, if not stronger, than the Obosh deck. So it gets rid of Steamkin, and then it also just gets rid of things like Priest of Forgotten Gods, cards that are just really difficult to deal with because we don't have a lot of removal. So in a best of 1 format against those aggressive decks, I think Fire Prophecy is pretty good. The second card we picked up an extra copy of was Bond of Flourishing. In a similar vein to what I was just mentioning, the extra 3 life is really relevant against mono red. It's almost like draw an extra card against them, or I guess asking them to discard a card. The 3 damage is just really, really powerful. Gaining the 3 life is really relevant there. And it also helps us filter our hands a little bit. Even if it doesn't find us Fires of Invention, it'll help us find something. I mean, if you look at the back half of our deck, these are all relevant cards. It also helps a lot, because we cut the 26th land, to just find that 3rd or 4th land. It's also just something to do in the early game against those Yorion decks, and I felt like we really needed that, because starting on turn 3, they have access to counter magic for fires. We really need something to do earlier. So most of the builds that I had seen were 4 Grazers, 2 Prophecies, 2 Bonds. I just added 2 earlier spells because I thought that it was pretty relevant in this format. Next, I also cut 1 copy of, I believe, Quartzwood Crasher for a Kahira. So running 1 main board Kahira has actually proven to be a huge benefit. I've seen a couple builds that run like Thrashing Brontodon. I think that's it. The 3/4 that can sack to destroy target artifact or enchantment. I think that's completely fine. I don't see anything wrong with adding more enchantment or artifact hate in this format. I like Kahira. My thought process here is, with so many decks running Shock and Bone Crusher Giants, just early removal, not only does Kahira almost, against those matchups, Kahira just almost never survives till turn 4. It also just gets bounced sometimes and then countered. So having an extra Kahira gives all of our creatures in this deck vigilance, which is absolutely massive in a race situation. Having the ability to both attack and block is just, it cannot be on. My experience with this deck getting to Mythic is that it's an absolutely massive buff. It's also a Lord, which is incredibly relevant, especially against decks that we struggle with that have things with 6 toughness. We just can't get through that with things like Shifting Ceratops and Angerus. So Kahira is really valuable. Here's the reason why I chose Kahira as well. With Vivian, when you want to utilize her minus ability, if you don't have another 5-drop without Kahira, if I take Kahira out, you're only, if you're having to use her minus ability with something like Angerus, your only option was to get Arboreal Grazer, which is just not that board impacting at all in the later stages of the game. So what I wanted was another 3-drop, a high impact 3-drop, that when my play pattern is Vivian, my only option to minus her is a 4-drop. I needed to get a high power or a high impact 3-drop. And I think Kahira does that better than any other 3-drop in the format right now. So the play pattern could be like, while I have fires out, I'll play a Vivian, I'll minus it. On any one of our 4-drops, get a Kahira out. Now, not only are my 4-drops buffed by an extra point of power and toughness, but they also have vigilance. It's just, I think it's 100% correct to play Kahira. One copy of it in the main board. The amount of games where I had Kahira in my hand and Kahira as a companion and available to play were negligible compared to the amount of games where I had Vivian and only a 4-drop as my option. And I do think that a lot of the time you really want to do that because this deck kind of wants to, like most Fires of Invention decks, it really wants to kind of get that one swing in that just ends the game. Finally, I have one copy of Embercleave. I've seen a lot of decks run 2. Obviously, Embercleave is an incredible card. There's nothing I can really say here against it to say that you shouldn't be running 2. I just couldn't really find room for the second copy. I love Cavalier Flame. It's one of the only options to give all of our creatures haste, and I think that it's too valuable. You are, when you're getting Shatter of the Sky, things like that, Yorion bouncing everything, you need a way to get your creatures in there quickly and counterattack, and I think Cavalier does that better than any other creature in the format. Giving all of your creatures haste is just too powerful. The bonus ability of pumping them is also just insane. And then it also gives you a way to filter away those lands in the late game. I couldn't justify cutting a Cavalier. I could justify cutting a Quartzwood Crasher. This is one of my, it's a flavor win, obviously, when you get to slam this and then start making huge tokens. But in a vacuum, it's just not all that great in this format if you don't have a way of giving it haste, especially if you don't have fires. It's a 5-mana 6/6 that does nothing on enter the battlefield most of the time, and it just gets popped a lot of times. It gets brazen borrowed. I mean, it's just kind of a liability. So it's definitely one of my favorite cards to win with, but I also found it a little bit underwhelming in the games where I didn't just overrun the opponent immediately. Embercleave is kind of our only way to swing through some of the heavier creature matchups. This deck is really weak to a couple decks in the format that aren't necessarily top tier, but we just almost have no ways to beat them sometimes. The first one that comes to mind are the Amori Mutate decks. Without a lot of removal, I mean, we've got Fire Prophecy. We really don't have a lot of options for getting rid of, we actually have no options to get rid of something like an Auspicious Sterix that's just constantly mutating on itself. We don't have anything that gets rid of it. We can maybe swing through it with Questing Beast, but once that Sterix gets going, there's no way for this deck to keep up with that amount of card advantage. They're going directly to the battlefield. Once they get things like Ghidorah or the Teamer, Mutate, Mythic, I forget it's real Illuna. Once that train starts rolling, there's just no way for us to keep up with it. So the Amori deck is probably our weakest matchup, in my opinion. I think I've got like a 10 to 15% win rate against that deck. It's absolutely insane how bad our matchup is into that. But other than that, I don't think that this deck is top tier, but it does have some kind of off-meta answers to very, very popular strategies. Gemrazor is really strong into Fires of Invention, into Witch's Oven, and it even hits some of the more kind of obscure things that you might not necessarily think about. It hits Anax, which is pretty insane. Anax is an enchantment creature, so getting rid of that really early is pretty great. Obviously, it hits Team of Reclamation. In some cases, it can hit, random enchantments like the different omens, that cycle. I've gotten Shadow Spear with it a couple times. I've gotten Embercleave, but for the most part, it's there for opposing Fires of Invention. It's there for Witch's Oven. It's there for most other things. Shifting Ceratops, this has been probably my favorite card in the deck. Auto win against Mono Blue Tempo. It's one of the few cards that can bring you back after just an insane Yorion turn where they Luca, Agent of Treachery, play the Yorion, bounce everything. I mean, that's kind of the play pattern of the Yorion deck, and Shifting Ceratops gets to swing through Agent, swing through Yorion, swing through most of the cards in that deck. I've stolen a lot of wins with Shifting Ceratops, and I cannot say enough good things about it. It is easily my favorite kind of tool in this arsenal for the current format. And worst, absolute floor, it's just a 4-mana 5/4 that ends up being a 4-mana 6/5 with Vigilance, potentially Haste when you've got Kahir out. So, absolutely love Shifting Ceratops. Questing Beast, it actually has, I think, a lot more relevance in this format than before. Questing Beast is chock full of text. So let's just take a look here. Damage combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented. Doesn't seem like it has that much relevance at surface level, but when you're seeing this many God's Willing decks, things that give protection, Questing Beast is absolutely insane against those decks. I've seen a lot of people misplay around it where they think that protection is going to allow their creature to survive while killing off our Questing Beast. Specifically with the enchantment decks, the Lurish enchantment decks. Questing Beast, just eats all of those up. It's really, really, really neat. It's also pretty strong just against Teferi, obviously. It's one of the best decks, or one of the best matchups for it. Other than that, Vivien has been really neat. There are a lot of times, honestly, where her passive ability will just gets you through a bunch of lands. I'm sorry, she gets kind of caught up with the lands. If you've got 2 lands on top, it can be very difficult. She doesn't provide that much card advantage, but getting a 3/3, which eventually becomes a 4/4, is pretty strong every turn, obviously. If you've got something like Vivien, minus for a Cavalier Flame, also get something else, it's just, you can't really understate how powerful that is. She does die a lot. She's only got 3 loyalty. She only pluses for 1. So if you play Fires on turn 4, Vivien on turn 5, minus her, get an extra creature, it's very strong. If you're playing against those decks that have like 6 or 7 little 1/1s around, chances are if you're doing that play pattern, you are going to win. But she does just end up with 1 loyalty a lot of the time. But still worth it, I think. The beast tokens do get buffed up by Kahir, as I mentioned, and because Kahir gives them vigilance, you normally either get to choose reach or trample. Reach is somewhat relevant if you're dealing with Sphinx of Foresight, stuff like that. It does come up some of the time. Trample is pretty relevant with Quartzwood Crasher. It allows you to create more tokens. And that's the deck. That's the reason why I chose it. I guess one last thing I'll mention is we do kind of get to play 2 free-ish Bonder's Enclave. If we've got Fires, we don't need our mana, so Bonder's Enclave is a perfect mana sink. If the game is going well, this is draw an extra card every turn, which is busted for essentially free. On the games where we don't have Fires, it sometimes doesn't do what we need it to do. The really nice thing is if we hit those land pockets while we have Vivien out, Bonder's Enclave allows us to kind of rip the top card off the library, giving us a better chance. We do have 2 Ketria Triomes, sorry. The cycling helps. Every now and again it'll become relevant. If this is your 4th land, it's really unfortunate when you've got Fires in your hand, but it's just kind of a tap land that also cycles. We're not actually running anything blue, but it's sometimes helpful. I'm not actually 100% sure how much I like it, but it does sometimes become relevant. And then 4 temples. This just helps. We do need some card filtering. We do need to be able to control our draws a little bit in this format. If you're not doing any scrying, if you're not fixing your hands at all, you're probably just losing. So it does become relevant. It's also a really, really nice card to add a second land with Arboreal Grazer on turn 1. Um, can't say enough good things about it. The mana base is pretty simple here. Um, four shocks, 4 temples, and these 2. I don't really think that we're missing anything in terms of the land base. Um, it's a good deck. You could potentially get a little cute with something like the Labyrinth of Scophos, I think it's called. Not actually sure. There are a couple colorless lands that you could maybe consider, but the amount of games where these things just become liabilities instead of advantages, I think are not worth it. If you're going to have a mana sink, I personally really like Bonder's Enclave. But honestly, maybe a third Bonder's Enclave would be even better. Also, the Labyrinth doesn't actually do much against when you're trying to swing in. If they've blocked your creature, I guess if you have Trample, it's pretty good. But maybe it's worth running one. I could definitely try it. I don't think there's a whole lot else going on though in terms of the land base. But anyways, that's the deck. Thanks for sticking around, guys. I really appreciate it. We did make it to Mythic this season. We've dropped our rank fairly quickly since getting into Mythic. We started at 98%. We're at 95 now. I was kind of hoping to get into the stages where I get an actual rank, but we'll see. That's the next goal. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the deck tech, and I will definitely be uploading a few more videos here shortly. So thanks, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.